What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy back with Hometown Commander. Today we are starting a new series. We've been brewing more on the channel, and that's been a ton of fun. I got to talk about the main decks and how we were updating them when Dominaria United came out. But what I really wanted to do also is talk about kind of how editing decks happens over the process of a deck's lifespan, from testing to getting towards building. And so I'm calling this series on deck because this is going to be decks that are close to the point that I feel like I should build them. They're in those final testing stages, and they're getting closer to kind of what I look for out of a deck that's going to become a main deck. Today we're looking at Kethis, the Hidden Hand. Kethis is a legendary creature. It says legendary creatures you cast cost 1 less to cast, and then you can exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard to give every legendary card in your graveyard the ability to be cast from the graveyard. Kethis is built in a lot of different ways. A buddy of mine has a Kethis Elves deck, which is kind of interesting, playing a lot of legendary elves. But the first thing I ever looked at when I looked at Kethis was Superfriends, or Planeswalker Tribal. And the reason there is because I think some of the downside to Planeswalkers sometimes is just how much they cost. There are just some Planeswalkers that would be better if they cost even 1 less or 2 less in most scenarios, especially on turn 6 or 7 where you have 7 or 8 mana. If you could get 2 of them as opposed to 1 of them down, it would generate a lot of value. So what my goal for Kethis was to make a Super Friends deck that would bring these Planeswalkers down, create tokens to help defend them, and then potentially overrun the board and end the game. I've played probably a dozen games with Kethis so far, and I have to say I really like the deck. The deck is a ton of fun. The Planeswalkers that I chose here were some of my favorites that have ever been released in these 3 colors, specifically some of the things like Garruk and Kaya and Sorin and Renin 7 and Lulth, these Planeswalkers that make great tokens. And so for most of them, my caveat was they have to make tokens or enable me down that strategy. First, I'm going to give a little bit of a deck tech as far as what my thoughts were, my card inclusions, and then I want to talk about how I want to change the deck going forward. So almost every Planeswalker in the deck has a particular reason why it's here. A lot of them make tokens, and to be 100% honest, that's why most of them are here. You have things like a Johnny Steadfast here, which put a counter and a loyalty counter on every creature and Planeswalker we control, which is very, very useful. Same thing with the Johnny Sleeper Agent, although it cares a little bit more about scrying on the top and putting counters on creatures. But if we can get this down doubled tokens with some cards we're going to talk about later, we can ultimate right away and start dealing damage in the form of poison counters to our opponents when we're playing our creatures and our Planeswalkers. Same thing with the Johnny the Great-Hearted here. The bottom ability puts counters on all our creatures and Planeswalkers, but it gives all our creatures vigilance. This means all of our tokens can attack and block, which is really beneficial. We have our Elspeth here, the first, giving creatures abilities and then being able to -7 there for a bunch of angels. And then, of course, Elspeth's Sun's Champion is a board wipe in its own right and can also make tokens. Most of the Garruks make some sort of token or do some sort of other abilities as well, which is really good. I have my favorite of the Gideons, Gideon Live Zendikar here from BFZ. Comes down for 0 and makes 2. It makes a white, a 2/2 white ally creature token, and it can become a creature on its +1, or for its -4, you get an emblem, or creatures you can get +1/+1. If we double the amount of loyalty on Gideon, we can activate that -4 more than once, which will just end up stacking emblems for buffing our creatures. Kai the Inexorable, of course, can exile target permanent, and then Kai the Geist Hunter, very big, -2 there, can double the amount of tokens produced this turn, which is great. We have a couple of those effects in the deck, but we want as many of those as we can. Liliana, of course, great because it gives us a zombie. Also great because it draws us a card whenever a creature dies, but it's also great because it can get rid of creatures on our opponent's fields. Lulth, standard powerhouse in its time, but is going to get loaded up with counters. the ultimate isn't really as beneficial, but let me tell you, making those spider tokens with reach is going to help us out in a ton of scenarios where we would not be able to otherwise. Nissa was mainly in here to put creatures down, especially something like a Vorinclex when we have a bunch of on it, a bunch of counters on it. Both Sorens make tokens. Solemn Visitor gives our creatures lifelink. If we want to use that, Mirthless lets us look at that top card, and then if we can ultimate it, deals 13 damage to any target, and we gain 13. Tevitzot, get those tokens on the +2, and then that -10 gaining control of all commanders, which is huge. If we can take our opponent's commanders most of the time, we're going to end up pushing through for victory. Ugin, board wipe in his own right. We have no problem getting to 8 mana, and so I think Ugin's really great because that minimum is -2. His +2 does damage. At maximum, his -10 is going to probably push us through for a win. Vivian on the Hunt was a card that I honestly hadn't really looked at too hard for the deck until I was putting it together. But it's played really well. The +2 is kind of a birthing pot effect, which is kind of interesting. We can take a token or take a smaller creature and go up the chain. Let's say we have something like Chatterfang or Lae'zel, as you can see down there in the creatures, and we really need Yawgmoth, Carthalion, or something like that to finish off a combo. It does allow us to do that, although that would not happen as often as you'd think. It is still possible. And then we're playing Vraskal Golgari Queen, mainly just for the +2 and the -3, getting rid of things when we need it. The emblem is pretty cool as well, if we can get it up there and get it going to have another win condition. And then Wrenn and 7 is just going to make those massive tree folk tokens. And it can also get us those lands as well. So we go into the legendary creatures again. We're trying to only play legendary creatures since Kethis reduces those. We've got our suite of 6. We got Captain Sisay, tap to go get a legendary card. This is kind of a searcher for those planeswalkers or anything else. Carthalion, of course, which allows every one of our Planeswalker's abilities to cost +1 more. So any Planeswalker ability that pluses is going to plus by an extra. Any Planeswalker ability that's a 0 or a minus is just going to get added 1 to. So a 0 becomes a +1, a -1 becomes a 0, and go on. So Karth is very good. A very good commander in their own right, but I think I prefer them as a piece in the strategy. Chatterfang and Yawgmoth serve the same purpose in this deck, which is to take our tokens and maximize them towards getting rid of our opponent's threats, whether they have indestructible or things like that. Chatterfang simply makes us more tokens and then can sacrifice the squirrels to get rid of problematic creatures. And then Yawgmoth can sacrifice creatures to do the same thing, deal damage to or put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, but it also draws us a card, which is absolutely huge, especially if we need to refill our hand. Lae'zel and Vorinclex both serve a very similar purpose, but they are awesome when they're paired together. So Lae'zel says if you put 1 or more counters on a creature or planeswalker you control, you put that many +1. And then Vorinclex has a similar text, but it says that you put double. But the great part about Vorinclex is it actually also halves the amount of counters that your opponents put on their creatures. So Vorinclex is strictly better, but we want access to more than one of them. We don't want to just only play Vorinclex or only play Lae'zel. Having both of them is important, right? We're playing an 89 card deck. Into our suite of spells, a lot of searching. I was trying out Call of the Gatewatch and Deploy the Gatewatch and Search for Glory, cards that can get us planeswalkers. We'll talk in a second about what I want to do with these. We've got a little bit of ramp, Nature Explorer for our Seek 3 visits. We have this Genesis wave. It's probably going to end up coming out. Removal, we have Urza's Ruinous Blast, going to get rid of all non-land permanents that aren't legendary, which will save all of our planeswalkers. It will nuke all of our tokens in the process, but it's going to completely wipe away for us. And then Martial Coup, which is if we spend 5 or more into it, it's a board wipe that's going to get us a bunch of tokens. And remember, these board wipes, not Urza's, but Martial Coup, is not going to destroy our planeswalkers. It's just going to destroy creatures. So this will help us kind of deal with our opponent's board and be able to push through. A removal suite, I mean, we're playing into 3 of the best colors for removal. Anguished Unmaking, Assassin's Trophy, Deadly Rollick is probably going to deal with about anything we'd need. We're going to add the Patch Exile in there as well to have another piece of cheap removal. We have the E-Tutor, Vamp Tutor, and Worldly Tutor to help us get specific things. And then I added March of the Multitude and Secure the Waste in to kind of give us some abilities to make tokens on our opponent's turn, especially if we have a bad hand. Best part about March of the Multitudes is you can convoke for it. So you can tap your creatures. Tapping the creatures is considered to be a part of March of the Multitudes ability. So you can tap them even if they have summoning sickness, which is really cool. Secure the Waste is just X white, X tokens. So that's great. We can use that before our turn. Artifact Suite, we're playing a little bit of mana. The Signet, the Chromatic Lantern to make all of our mana of any color. Mana Crypt and Soaring. Crypt and Soaring are both in here because we're playing the Ursa Saga, which can get either. But the three other big ones here are Luxior to turn either our Planeswalkers into creatures, allow them to attack to do some damage. I won a game with a very big Lolth one time by putting Luxior on it, and Lolth was up to 27 or 28 loyalty and slammed through for the game. Phyrexian Altar, which is going to be a huge piece of the strategy we're going to get into in just a second. And then the Chain Veil, which will basically allow us to double up the amount of times we can use our loyalty abilities in one turn, which is going to be massive. Now, the downside of the Chain Veil is the beginning of our end step. If we didn't activate the loyalty ability of a Planeswalker, we lose 2 life. But if we have a full board, it'll never happen. We'll go down into the enchantments. Same thing here. This is going to we're going to talk about this just a little bit more in a second once we get into the new strategy. But Anointed Procession, Divine Visitation, Luminarch Ascension, Doubling Season. All of these care about making tokens. Anointed doubles them. Divine Visitation gives us angels instead of whatever the token is, which is great. Doubling Season doubles the amount of counters and the amount of tokens. So this is kind of another copy of Vorinclex for that way. And Luminarch Ascension, if you can go 4 turns without your opponents damaging you, is a very cheap way to make angel tokens, and we want that. Mirari's Wake, going to double the amount of mana we produce. It's great. Unfortunately, it's not legendary. It would make it even better if it was. But it's going to be great, and it also buffs our creatures. We're running a couple of the oaths. I think the only oath we're not playing right now is the Oath of Kaya, just because it ends up not being as good, I think, as the other 4. Oath of Ajani, Planeswalker spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So with Kethis on the battlefield, this would be 2 colorless less. Oath of Gideon, each Planeswalker you control enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it, which is great. Oath of Liliana, beginning of the end step. If a Planeswalker enters the battlefield under your control this turn, we get a 2/2 zombie. So again, same thing, going for that token strategy. And then Oath of Nissa, which says that we can spend manas over any mana of any color to cast Planeswalker spells. This is this and Chromatic Lantern kind of do the same thing, allow us to spread our mana out. Smothering Tide. Smothering Tide is very important in this deck because the treasures are very beneficial, especially when it comes to getting the right colors of mana that we need. We're playing a lot of Planeswalkers that don't necessarily cost the same colors. So as much as we can try our best to fix our mana other ways, this is a good way to do that. Sylvan Library. There are obviously going to be turns where we pay 4 or 8 life to get the cards we need to push our strategy forward, and Sylvan Library does a really good job. And then one of the new cards just came out in Dominaria United, which was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to put this deck together, was Ursa Assembles the Titans. We in the Abzan colors do not have easy ways to activate our Planeswalker abilities twice except the Chain Veil. You know, in Bant colors, which is another popular 3-color combination for Super Friends, you have things like Oath of Teferi that do that. So when I immediately saw this, I was like, wow, this is a way that for 5 mana on 1 turn, I can activate all my loyalties again, or I can put this down I can read ahead to 2, put a Planeswalker on my hand, and then next turn, kind of ramp up to have all of my Planeswalkers be able to activate twice. Worst case scenario, you throw this down on 1, get a Planeswalker from the top 4, then you put a Planeswalker down, then you get to activate them twice. So Ursa Assembles the Titans is definitely a way to build up either over a couple turns or slam this down immediately as another copy of the Chain Veil. Now, the cool part about this is, I think with the way this is worded, if we have this and the Chain Veil out, let's read this because I've never read this. So I believe if we have both out, we would actually be able to activate them 3 times, which is really cool. So there's a little combo there. And we've got our mana base. I've tried to spread the mana base out as best that I can. Interplanar Beacon allows us to gain a life whenever we cast a Planeswalker spell. I'm playing City of Brass, and just for a little bit of any color in case I need it. We're playing Yavimaya, we're playing Urborg, we're playing Cabal Coffers. It's a very interesting mana base. Plus of Heroes seems really good in this deck, and then we have Karn's Bastion for Proliferate. So really cool as far as the land base goes. So anyway, that's a little flyby of Kethis. This is how the deck has sat for the last 10 games that I played it. But what I want to do right now is talk about the lessons that I've learned from playing Kethis. I think this is what I want the On Deck series to be about. What have I learned so far in testing? How am I going to change the deck going forward to push it towards its ability to be enters, to be built as a main deck and to be played more often, take to shops, that kind of thing. Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned with Kethis is if I want to go the tokens route with Kethis, I think this deck just basically becomes an Aristocrats deck that also cares about Planeswalkers. The one thing that I've learned in the 10 games that I've played so far is these Planeswalkers make a lot of tokens, especially with these in the mix, and especially with our enchantment support in the mix. There are turns where I've produced, 10 tokens, 20 tokens, 30 tokens. There have been turns that I've just completely gone ham and produced a bunch of tokens. And what I think I need to do is lean harder into the tokens and put in some aristocrat payoffs. I added Phyrexian Altar in earlier, and this is what I wanted to talk about, because I can use those tokens and put them into Phyrexian Altar to get more mana, to play more Planeswalkers, to play more spells, to play that kind of thing. And I saw 1 or 2 games where Phyrexian Altar let me use the Planeswalker abilities to get tokens, attack with the tokens. If the token gets blocked, throw it into Phyrexian Altar or to fund some sort of other, Vampiric Tutor or something in combat, or, use the mana for something as opposed to just losing the creature. And if not, in main 2, sack all the tapped creature tokens if you want to try to make some more, or even on your opponent's turn, sack them to use a March of the Multitudes or Secure the Waste to make a bunch of tokens. Well, what I realized was the only death trigger I was really taking advantage of were Liliana and Lolth. I didn't really have any other death triggers in the deck that I was really taking advantage of these tokens dying for. Now, I had outlets to sacrifice them, Chatterfang, Yawgmoth. There are outlets to sacrifice them for gain. Pardon me. I was just not finding any benefit on the back end, right? When we sacrifice those creature tokens, it's great to get a benefit on the front end, but what we want to do is we want to also get benefit on the back end. That's what Aristocrats deck cares about, you're sacrificing permanents or creatures or tokens or what have you to not only gain a benefit from sacrificing them, but also for the effect that you sacrifice them for. So I think what I want to do is try to add a couple more abilities that are going to benefit me when I sacrifice things. And then maybe take a look at my Planeswalkers and see maybe if there's some substitutions I can make to just put better Planeswalkers in to fit our Aristocrat strategy. So the first thing I want to talk about is payoffs for my tokens. So the first 2 cards that came into my mind when I was trying to think, okay, if I'm going Aristocrats, I need death triggers. And the first was Bastional Remembrance. This is an artifact from an enchantment from Ikoria, that says when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 human soldier creature token. Great. Gives me a token, and that works into all of our other strategies. But it says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Well, this is huge because this card doesn't care how my creature dies, whether I killed it, whether my opponent killed it, whether an effect killed it. Dies just mean it has to go from the graveyard or from the battlefield to the graveyard. If my creature token goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, it activates this ability, and it doesn't care how it does it. I think Bastion Remembrance is exactly what I want from this deck. And if I have a bunch of tokens and I sacrifice them all at once, what I'm going to do is end up chunking my opponents out for a bunch, and I'll end up gaining some life in the process. So I think Bastion Remembrance is exactly what we want to do. The second was a card like Agent of the Iron Throne. This is a background from Commander Legends 2. If you guys aren't aware of Commander Legends 2, backgrounds are enchantments that are only active when your commander or commanders are on the battlefield. So in this case, I would have to have Kethis out in order to get Agent of the Iron Throne. But that's not going to be very hard. Kethis is pretty cheap. And you tend not to play him. I think if I had this card in hand, I would not play Kethis until I needed it, right? Or needed that reduction. That way I could get good benefits. So whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. So the reason this doesn't say dies is because an artifact can't die. An artifact just goes to the graveyard from the battlefield. So basically, if an artifact goes from the graveyard to the battlefield or a creature dies, each opponent loses a life. So no benefit, life benefit here, like on Bastion. But if we think about it, this and Bastion out, we're now lose 2, gain 1. So I think Agent of the Iron Throne is exactly what we want to do. The first thing that I thought of when I was looking at Agent of the Iron Throne was something like Pitless Plunder. Pitless Plunder is going to break my only creatures in the deck being legendary, so I cannot go search this with Sisay, but I could go search this with anything else. It says whenever another creature you control dies, you create a treasure. Well, the cool part here is if I pair this with Phyrexian Altar and I sack a token to Phyrexian Altar, I'm actually getting a treasure and I'm getting a mana from Phyrexian Altar. So this is one of these popular combo combinations in Aristocrat decks where you pair a sack outlet in Phyrexian Altar with a payoff like Pitless Plunder. Well, the cool part here is Pitless Plunder, right, gives me a treasure. Phyrexian Altar gives me a mana, right? Well, if I have something like Luminarch Ascension powered up, it costs me 2 mana to get an angel, right, with flying. So what I can do is I can actually endlessly loop them at that point. I can sack the angel to Phyrexian Altar. It gives me a mana. The Pitless Plunder gives me back a treasure, and then I can put them back into this. And so now we have kind of a 3-card combo, and the only thing we need left is a payoff. Agent of the Iron Throne, Bastional Remembrance. Okay, so we have a 4-card combo here. We can also look at some other cheaper ways to have these combos that we kind of that we can recur. But I think the important part about this interaction together is, in all reality, I really only need Pitless Plunderer out when I have tokens out to still get value, right? If any of my creatures die in combat, or if I sack any of my creatures to anything else, or if I put them to block or anything, it doesn't care how they die, it just cares that they die. So I think Pitless Plunder is really important because it's just going to net me mana overall. There's no downside to it. In fact, most of the time when it's out, it's going to bring me good upside. So the other aristocratic type effect that I wanted to take a look at was the Meat Hook Massacre. The good part here is it's legendary. So the cool part is with Kethis out, this is already 1 black for free, right? I already get the X's 1 for free because that's going to cost me 1 less to cast. So I already have 1 into this anyway. And the cool part about Meat Hook is you don't have to pay anything for X. You can put it down for just 2 black mana, and then it basically just gets its bottom text, which is whenever a creature I control dies, each opponent loses a life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, I gain a life. Well, the cool part here is this is searchable with all of my legendary stuff. So if I get a Phyrexian Altar in this and I have a way to make a ton of tokens, awesome. I might be able to drain my opponents out. Or if I get this, Phyrexian Altar and Pitless Plunder and some other things out, well, great. It's going to drain my opponents even faster. I think so. This basically is going to sit alongside Bastion of Remembrance and Agent of the Iron Throne to be our kind of big aristocrat outlet. So as you can see, we're noticing this token sub theme or this token's main theme in the deck, and we're trying to bolster it up to make it better, to kind of make it that main juice of the deck. Okay, well, awesome. So add a couple more cards here. I just want to run through talking about why I think they'll be beneficial. The first is the Flawless Maneuver. This is a free spell. It gives creatures I control indestructible. I think Flawless Maneuver is really important because we're going to start to have more creatures that we care about. I'm really sad that this doesn't say permanents you control. That's why we would want to play something like a Heroic Intervention, which I'm actually surprised, honestly, isn't in the deck. Maybe that's something that we consider as well, is something like Heroic Intervention, which would protect all permanents we control, would gain Hexproof Indestructible. Flawless Maneuver just gives them Indestructible. But what I like about Flawless Maneuver is this is border wipe protection as long as we have Kethis out. I think this is really important, and I think Heroic Intervention is really important as well, because Heroic Intervention says permanent, so it's going to protect all of these as well. And then the last card I want to talk about as far as new cards added in goes, and then we'll talk about the 2 Planeswalkers that are here, is Rabble Rousing. Rabble Rousing is a card that I've used to great degree in Jetmir. If you want to take a look at my Jetmir deck, there is a deck tech up on the channel. Please go check that deck out. It's a ton of fun. If you're looking for a fun Naya tokens commander, Jetmir stomps, man. It's a great card. Rabble Rousing seems kind of interesting, though, because I think Rabble Rousing does everything that we want it to do, and it's going to just completely go in on our token strategies. So it has Hideaway 5. Hideaway 5 says that when we play it, we look at the top 5 cards, exile one of them face down, and it says whenever you attack with one or more creatures, create that many 1/1 tokens. Well, this is cool. We're going to make a ton of tokens when we attack, hopefully if we have a really big board. Then it says, then if you control 10 or more creatures, you play the card for free. So maybe we reveal a Planeswalker, or we reveal a tutor or a big creature or something like that. We get to play it for free once we hit 10. But the cool part about Rabble Rousing is after you satisfy the Hideaway effect, after the first time you get 10, you play the card for free. Every time you attack, you get that many tokens, which means now this is just going to sit here and net us tokens every time we attack. There's a lot of ways to make flying angels, flying vampires. There's a lot of ways to make tokens in the air that are going to be tough to deal with. This is just going to get worse and worse for our opponents. We have more tokens coming in. We can recycle the tokens we attacked with to Phyrexian Altar or something like that to get more mana, or we can sack the new ones that just came in to get mana. I think Rabble Rousing seems really interesting, and it's something that I want to try. If we're going to if we're going to really go towards this Aristocrat game plan, I feel like Rabble Rousing is going to be the card to do it. And then another card that I'm kind of feeling in on is Skull Clamp. So Skull Clamp, arguably one of the most broken equipment of all time for its ability, says equipped creature gets +1/-1. So if we equip this to a 1/1 creature, it immediately becomes a 2/0 and dies. And then a Skull Clamp says when the equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. Well, a lot of effects in our deck make 1/1 tokens. So I think a Skull Clamp seems literally perfect because we're basically going to take those 1/1s, lose one of them, and draw 2 cards. Phyrexian Altar only gives me mana. All the other things that I'm playing only give me mana, but this one is going to draw me cards, and I think that's super huge. I was looking at the Golden Throne just because this is a new card from the 40k decks. I don't think I like it as much now that I look at it, but I'm going to keep it here in the sideboard just in case. But the 2 other creatures I was looking at, legendary creatures, because in the past are very prevalent green-white decks that care about tokens are in Selesnya, and Tristani has generally been the commander that cares the most about that. We have Tristani Discordant from Ravnica Allegiance, which gives our creatures +1/+1, and when it comes in, we get creature tokens, and it says at the beginning of your end step, each player gains control of all creatures they own. That's to prevent people from stealing your creatures and that kind of thing. Then we have Tristani Selesnya's Voice, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness, and for 3 we can tap it to populate. This is the one that I'm more interested in, because if I'm making a ton of tokens, it means I'm going to gain a ton of life, right? And then for 3 mana, I can populate, which means create a token that's a copy of a creature token we control. I don't think Tristani's there yet. I still think I need to determine where some other cards are, but I think this one is probably the one that I'm the most interested in when it comes to that. But let's talk about the 2 Planeswalkers that I want to add in. The Wandering Emperor just came out in Kamigawa, Neon Dynasty. We can play it at flash speed. This is as long as it enters the battlefield this turn, you can activate her loyal abilities anytime you can play an instant. So if we flash us in our opponent's turn, we can use an ability. +1/+1 up to target creature, it gets first strike. We can -1 it for a 2/2, or we can -2 it to exile tapped target tap creature, and then we gain 2 life. I think with a token strategy in mind, I think the Wandering Emperor becomes even more important, because we can take advantage more of its other abilities to get rid of the tap creatures or to get counters. And then if we need to, we can make a token with it, and it comes in at flash speed. So if we ever have our combos set up and we literally just need a token on someone else's turn, we could flash this in and get that token on someone else's turn. And the second is a little bit of an odd one. I know that it's a little expensive for what it does, but I'm interested in it. And that's Vivien Monsters Advocate. This is a card that I've used in a lot of my mono green decks for its second ability. It says whenever you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature with lesser CMC, put it onto the battlefield, shuffle your value. If you're a newer player, CMC is the same thing as mana value. Converted mana cost and mana value are the same thing now. Mana value is just the newer term for it. So if we play Vorinclex, for example, with Vivien's Monsters Advocate, we can get any other creature in our deck for free. The bad part is if I play Yawgmoth, Pitless Plunder, Karth, or Captain Sisay, I can only go get Chatterfang or Lae'zel. So unfortunately, if we start at 6, we can get anything. But if I go down to 4, I can only get certain things. And then same thing, if I play a 2 or 3, a 3 here, there's nothing underneath it that I can get. But that's okay because her +1 is we make a 3/3 beast and we give it either Vigilance, Reach, or Trample. Well, that's great because it's a token. And if we double the amount of tokens that come down, that's great. The thing I also like about Vivien is it lets you look at the top card of your library and you can cast creature spells from the top of your library. So it also kind of extends our hand just that little bit. Okay, so we added 10 cards to our deck, 10 very important cards, but we added 10 cards to our deck. So what we need to do is start eliminating cards that we don't see fitting the strategy as important. And the first one to me was Nissa of the Shadowed Burrows. As much as I like it, and I think it's a great Planeswalker, I see other cards in the deck being more important than it. We added 2 Planeswalkers in, so I don't feel bad taking a Planeswalker or 2 out. We're going to still keep the same number of Planeswalkers in the deck. But I think Nissa is going to be something that, even though I like making lands into creatures and I like putting creatures down with less CMC than the number of counters on it, I just think I want to focus a little bit more in on that aristocrat strategy. And there's other creatures in our deck that just do a better job at it. As far as the next Planeswalker to cut, I'm really not sure. I mean, I look at the rest of the Planeswalkers in our deck, and they all do exactly what I want them to do. They all have good merit. They all have good abilities, and it's going to be tough to cut a Planeswalker. And so I think what I'm going to do is try my best not to cut another Planeswalker, although I think I have my ideas at what it would be. So let's move down. Do any of our creatures come out? Well, we added Pitless Plunder to be an aristocrat's payoff. Yawgmoth and Chatterfang already help us out with that. We talked about how Lae'zel and Vorinclex help us with that strategy, and we talked about how Karth and Sisay help us out. So I really don't think there's any other cards that I'd want to take out of my creature slots. I think all 7 of them are great. Only one of them can't be reduced by Kethis, but the other ones can. And I think in general, they just all help. So I don't really think that's worth taking out. So let's come down to the spells. The first thing I'm going to cut is Genesis Wave. As much as I like Genesis Wave, and I think it's, when I first built the deck, something I thought would be really good, my biggest problem with Genesis Wave is that the amount of mana needed to dump into Genesis Wave to make it effective in this deck, which actually would be equal to 6 or 7, is just a lot. And for that much mana, I can do a lot of other different things. So I think we cut Genesis Wave. Okay. Next up, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing in this deck already is that we can either take out certain search cards for other search cards. So for example, here we have Call the Gatewatch. Search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Well, there are other tutors that are cheaper than this that do the same thing, right? We're playing Demonic Tutor, but I think the big one that comes to mind for me that can also get anything, not just Planeswalkers, is Diabolic Intent. Diabolic Intent says in order to cast, we have to sacrifice a creature, which we're not going to have any problem doing except in the early game, and I'm willing to take that risk. Search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So instead of only targeting us for a Planeswalker, this will go and get us anything. Now we go to Deploy the Gatewatch. I have to admit, Deploy the Gatewatch did do really well for me in the times that I played it. But I think since we're just shifting slightly, just slightly, towards aristocrats, I think we need to lean on our other tutors to get us the cards we need And I think this is going to end up coming out. I really like Search for Glory. This is the perfect card because it lets us get a legendary card or a saga card. So it can either go get any of our planeswalkers, any of those big creatures we talked about, any of our legendary enchantments, or I can go get Urza's Assembles the Titans as well. It's the only saga that I'm playing. Can also go get, like I said, any of our enchantments that are legendary. So I really like Search for Glory because even though it's 3 mana, yes, you could argue a Imperial Tutor, an Imperial Seal, or something like that. Yes, it does hit more targets, but I think the good thing about Search for Glory here is it opens up a little bit more of my possibilities than the Gatewatch cards, which only hit Planeswalkers, which there's going to be a point where we need both Planeswalkers and our enchantments and our creatures. And so I like Search for Glory. I think Search for Glory does what we need it to do. I don't want to cut Martial Coup or Urza's Ruinous Blast because at the end of the day, they're board wipes. And board wipes are important, especially in a deck like this, because we're going to get attacked. Our opponents are definitely going to start attacking us and hurting us. I am a little bit more willing to cut Martial Coup than I am Urza's Ruinous Blast because we have more token production now. And I kind of wonder if Martial Coup, even though it is a board wipe, if we can get away without it. So I think I'm going to try that. I realize this puts me down to 1 board wipe, but remember, we do have something like Meat Hook Massacre, which I can go get. I have multiple sources to go get. That is also a board wipe as well. Yes, I have to pay more mana for it, but I think the difference is it will take out. It will actually take out indestructible creatures because I give them -X as opposed to a straight board wipe. Now, I know there's going to be someone watching this video is going to say, Millzy, you're not running enough board wipe removal. You're dumb. You need to run more of it. Okay, that's fair. But I think that this deck is going to do a lot better as a combo deck where we're focusing more into getting our combos going than as a deck that cares about removal. And I'm playing plenty of single target removal. I'm playing 3 exile effects and 1 destroy effect that can hit anything. Not only that, I'm hitting Urza's Ruinous Blast, which is going to take away most of our issues anyway. The only things that Urza's Ruinous Blasts are not going to take away is our opponent's commanders, and that's it, or their other legendary creatures. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that downside. A lot of people would say that they're not okay with that downside. But you have to remember is at the end of the day, we're building decks that we want to play, right? I'm building a deck for myself. I'm not building a deck for you as the listener or a person in my play group. I'm building the deck for me, and I'm okay with these 2 board wipe sources because I think I can find them when I would need them. Just from playing the deck already, I can always had a tutor, or I always had Captain Sisse, or a way to even get Captain Sisse. So I think I'll be okay. I think I'll have enough search. And if that's something that, you take a look at this list and you go, no, you need more search, cool. That's perfectly fine. Cut what you think is necessary. Play the board wipe protection, the board wipe destruction. But for me, I'd rather play the protection from board wipes, and I'd rather play into my combos and use them that way. Going into the instance, I'm going to cut the Whirly Tutor. As much as I like Whirly Tutor, I think all of our other tutors are taking care of it for us. Since Captain Sisse can get almost literally anything in the deck except Pitless Plunderer, I'm okay with relying on something like these guys to go get it. I have Vampiric Tutor, which is an unconditional tutor. I'm not worried about Pitless Plunder as much, and we're adding a bunch of card draw anyway with some of these cards. I watched Liliana draw me a ton of cards, and so I'm really not that worried about it, to be honest. So if I notice that it's a problem, if I notice that I'm having a tough time getting specific creatures, maybe I'll think about putting Worldly Tutor back in. But for the moment, I don't think it's as necessary as I think it is for our strategy. I think I'm going to cut Secure the Wastes as well. I think we added some more token production into our Planeswalkers. As much as I like Secure the Wastes, I think March of the Multitudes more often than not is going to be easier to cast and get more out of because we can convoke our tokens for it. I think the protection is more important than having a ton of spell-driven token creators. And so I'm okay with just having the one Again, I have no way to search it out, but that's fine. I have watched this Planeswalker core make me more tokens than I ever thought were possible. And so I would much rather pay dividends into this enchantment lineup to give me more tokens than rely on spells to give me it. This can give me value every turn. This can only give me value once. And I think for that reason, I'm willing to sidestep out of the spell token production and into the enchantment world. I know that logic would then say, Millzy, why don't you cut the March of the Multitudes as well? And the answer is I might have to. I'm looking at the deck and we're down to 104, and there's not many other cards that I see that I really want to cut. So we may actually have to cut March of the Multitudes and negate my entire side thing here, because it may actually have to come out. So I think what I'm going to do is cut it for now. And we'll come back. Lots of removal there. We want the E-Tutor because these are very important. And so I really want this because it's kind of the most important. This, and this can go get me the Planeswalkers that I need. This can go get me the Planeswalkers that I need. But I need this because all of these are important, and I need this. It has to be there, and I want to see it when I can see it. So artifacts. My gut kind of tells me to cut this Chromatic Lantern now. And the reason is I have this and I have some other things that are going to make me mana. I truly wonder how much the Chromatic Lantern is truly going to be important. I just don't think it is. And so I'm willing to cut the Chromatic Lantern for now. And again, just like March of the Multitudes, over the next few times testing, we're going to see, do I need to bring that Chromatic Lantern back in, or am I okay now with the other sources that I put in? So I really like that. All right, let's go to the enchantments. We got 2 cards to cut. This is going to be tough because, we added this, and we added the meat hook. And I really like all of our cards. We can get rid of the Chromatic Lantern because we have something like this, right? This allows me to use any mana of any color. I'm kind of thinking about cutting Oath of Liliana, maybe. It just gives me a token at the end of the turn. There's other things that just produce more tokens than it. This is important to me because I can cast mana of any color. This, they come in with additional loyalty counter, and this, they cost 1 less. So all of those seem more important to me than Oath of Liliana. So I think that becomes the best cut there. So we got 1 cut left. I really don't want it to be another Planeswalker. So what I want to do is go through really quick. I'm just going to eye through these quick. See, really, honestly, what I'm willing to give up. I don't want to give up either of these because I think they both have their importance. You could argue that Heroic Intervention is a little more important than Flawless Maneuver, but I still think they're very important. Don't want to cut the Path to Exile. It's very cheap. It's always good to have around. We need our ramp. We need I really see a purpose for all 7 of these creatures. I mean, I guess you could argue that we don't need Yawgmoth and Chatterfang, but I like both of them. I think they both have good purpose. All right, so if it's a Planeswalker, which one do we cut? So looking at our Planeswalkers, an argument could be made for a Johnny Sleeper Agent because it has to ultimate to give us value. We're relying on this Doubling Season Vorinclex game plan to get our Planeswalkers down with double their loyalty. But if I can't get a Johnny down for double its loyalty, how long does it take to get to its ultimate? 2 turns at a +1. Whereas I'm looking at something like Vivian or Elspeth's Resplendent. Elspeth Resplendent is going to end up giving my creatures counters and buffing them up. Vivian's going to get me a beast every turn, the turn it comes down. I think the argument could be made also for Vivian on the Hunt. The only thing about Vivian on the Hunt is it's going to get me a Rhino no matter what when I play it. So this is kind of tough. I mean, I like all the Garrux. They all do really good things. You could argue for Garruk Apex Predator because it is the most expensive, but I don't. I really like it. I think it's got a really good suite of abilities, and that -8 is going to get gross, especially when we need to start targeting down opponents. Man, is it something like Gideon? The only problem is I really like his emblem, and we can do the emblem right away. Debuff all our creatures if we need to end the game via combat. Tevish Zot, I like that it's a +2. It comes down and gives us those tokens immediately. Man, my gut almost says it's Vivian's Monsters Advocate, and just see if it really, see if there's ever really any situation where I'd need it. But man, this is tough, guys. This is the worst part about deck building, in my opinion, is when you get down to 101 or 102, and you just got to make these gut calls, what's best for your deck, what makes the most sense, what gets you the farthest, what gives you the most utility all of the time instead of some of the time. I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to cut Vivian Monsters Advocate for now. And what I would probably advise you do in one of those scenarios where you're not quite sure what to cut, but you need to cut something, is pick a creature, or sorry, in this case, I want to pick a Planeswalker in our deck. Let's say it's a Johnny Sleeper Agent. And what I'm going to do is, over the next few games of testing, I'm going to say, which of those two would I rather have in the moment? The Vivian that I cut, or a Johnny Sleeper Agent, which is more important? Or if it's not a Johnny for you, pick another Planeswalker out of this list that you don't like that I like, and say, okay, which would I rather have? Vivian Monsters Advocate or this Planeswalker? And I think that's the only way that I can do it from this point, is test them over time and determine which I think is the most beneficial. And then after a few games, if I agree, hey, actually Vivian Monsters Advocate is a lot better for what I want here, then I know, okay, I have to cut it for that. But other than that, guys, we got down to 100, and I think I'm really happy. I think we added all the Aristocrat stuff that I wanted to add. The deck, I think, spins a lot better towards what we're trying to do, and I'm really excited to test it out. I left him a couple of the cards in my sideboard, so we'll go through here quick and clean it up. I don't see the Gatewatch spells coming back in. I don't see Genesis Wave coming back in. I think I'm content to cut Nissa. I don't think she does what I want. I don't think the Golden Throne as good as I think either. And I'm going to leave the sideboard at those 9, just because I think they're all worth potentially coming back in if I deem them to be necessary. But yeah, I mean, especially something like March of the Multitudes, or like I said, Tristani, if that's something I'm interested in. But yeah, now we're down to 100. I'm going to make the changes to the deck sitting in front of me with my proxies, and we're going to test this out at the table on a few Monday nights. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this style of this style of video is something you're interested in. I plan to do this with a couple of the decks that I kind of have in this on deck category, just so you guys can see the lessons that I'm learning from testing and how I'm seeing things unfold. And hopefully when we get to Brothers War, I'll be doing the same updates I did for my main decks, like I did for Dominator United, for the on deck decks as well. So you get to see the changes if anything comes out that I deem to be really necessary. To spoil it, 1 or 2 of them will actually probably be changed a lot by Brothers War. There's actually one of the on deck techs I actually haven't built yet because of the Brothers War. I think there might be some artifacts that come out in that set or in the archive, the Artifact Mystical Archive, that I may want to add. So I purposely haven't built the deck yet for that reason. So we'll talk about that in a future video. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.